What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota and Danny Abdeljabbar. What's up, man? How are you?
Chilling, man. How about yourself?
I cannot complain. I'm fresh off Broadway.
Oh, fresh off Broadway.
Fresh off Broadway. Not as in I was performing in Broadway, but I went to a Broadway play.
What'd you see?
Dear Evan Hansen.
Dear Evan Hansen.
You ever hear of that?
I don't know.
So here's some context. So it was a birthday present for my girlfriend, and I'm better at getting events than picking out things or material things. I'm not very good at that. So I felt it would be a better idea for me just to get her tickets to a Broadway show because, most women, they really enjoy them.
Well, I think most people like doing things rather than receiving things.
I'll be completely honest. I may act like I'm kicking and screaming when I'm brought to Broadway plays or Broadway shows, but when I'm there, I actually have a lot of fun. And whatever song, the big headlining songs are always stuck in my head. But the idea came to me after the show. Like, I'm ashamed to admit it, but I was obviously listening to the soundtrack afterwards.
Oh, man.
I was like, I want to listen to this song again. It was so fun. What would be good musical ideas for topics that we often speak about on the show?
Geez. I don't know.
Like, if you were going to adapt bro history topics into a musical, what would you adapt?
Maybe like the impeachment inquiry and like make it like Phantom of the Opera.
I would. So here's
Phantom of the impeachment.
Here's what I would do. So I would do a musical on the Iranian Revolution or the 1953 coup leading up to the Iranian Revolution and focus the musical on the Shah of Iran.
Oh, would it be like in the style of Rent?
I don't know what Rent is.
You don't know what Rent is? All right.
What is Rent?
Rent was one of the most popular Broadway shows like ever. And it was about like... spoiler alert, it's about like AIDS in like the early 90s or whatever. Oh. And it's like just a bunch of people like living in New York and like some of them gets AIDS. You know the song
Everyone has AIDS.
Yes, that's
AIDS. That's what it's making fun of.
Yes.
I was thinking of the title, and then I started writing songs for it as well. Not really writing songs, but I would love to work with somebody in the future for the grand rendition of The Shah and I, and it's about the relationship between Richard Nixon and the Shah of Iran.
Oh, I love the Shah.
Because they were buddies. Those are the two main characters. Oh, me and you are like, oh. Can you imagine a duet between the Shah of Iran and Richard Nixon in a Broadway play? Yeah. How funny that would be, seeing Richard Nixon in the Shah of Iran in a Broadway production doing a duet.
Singing songs.
I never thought someone would be like me. And then have these like grand, fantastical, like
set designs,
Persian set designs with the Shah of Iran, and then you can go over the story from like the Kermit Roosevelt like coup of Mossadegh in Iran. That's how you started off, and obviously you can't be historically accurate with these things. Like you gotta
flub some stuff.
You gotta flub some stuff and make characters where they're not. You gotta put them in different time periods where they never existed. So you got to make Kermit Roosevelt like a reoccurring character, even though his role kind of ends after the coup within that relationship, and you lead it up to like the Ayatollah of Iran being released into Iran from Iraq, and you have like a badass song for him. He's like the villain.
Right, he'd have like a Darth Vader theme song,
Yeah, like a real like an evil song. It's like I am the Ayatollah, like something ridiculous. Oh,
that would be cool.
It would be a huge...
I'd watch that.
I'm playing off The King and I, which was a famous. I think it was a Broadway show. It was a musical, like from the 30s or 40s, and the Shah and I, the relationship between Richard Nixon and the Shah, because they were best buddies. They were.
Sounds like we should pitch this to Netflix. They could probably make that.
No, but
that's
it
where
needs
everything
to be
goes
on
now.
Stage. No one's gonna want to see people singing on their TV screens. You got to see a live
Broadway
Netflix
production
does
a lot of shit
of the Shah and I. Or we can do. I can't think of another good Broadway production on topics that we speak about. Like, could you do a Toyota War episode or a Toyota War Broadway production?
Maybe. Or like a Millennium Challenge one.
A musical on the Millennium Challenge. How about a musical on all of them? All of them have to do with the Middle East because I feel like
I got an idea. So what about something for the F-35? You know, remember what was the name of the movie that we watched on the Bradley?
The Pentagon Wars.
Okay, so you know the Pentagon Wars, but make it like current for like the F-35. And I'm thinking, have you ever seen The Producers before?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know how in The Producers they like intentionally try to make the worst possible Broadway show?
Yeah, right? Isn't it like Springtime with Hitler or something like that?
Yeah, I love that song. It's hilarious. So imagine if they were singing about like if the show was about trying to make the most expensive, like worst possible like military equipment. And it's like that.
you got to get some relevant historic characters in there, and then you have yourself a show.
Mm-hmm.
Guys,
I'll flesh that one out and we'll talk about it. Hey, if you guys are listening,
if you have
hit
ideas,
us up on Twitter, or like email us some ideas for
at info@brohistory. Email us musicals based off historic topics or maybe things that we speak about. info@brohistory, our musical. We'll start writing it. We'll find a production crew to start writing this musical. All right. Let's get into the actual show. So, there's been a lot of talk about World War III lately. If you if you're on the old Twitterverse, there's that World War III meme that went out.
I'm digging the memes. Yeah, they're hilarious.
And they're kind of funny. And a lot of people are comparing a lot of the things that have been happening in the Middle East, specifically the Soleimani, the assassination, to kind of like a Gavrilo Princip, the murder of Archduke Ferdinand type moment. And I think we even referenced that before he was even murdered, like what would be that moment.
Yeah. And
I thought it was actually a really good time to not necessarily tackle current events today, but reflect on World War I. Like what actually led to World War I, what were the major themes behind the start of the war? Like what the hell happened? This was one of the most brutal affairs in human history.
The meat grinders.
Millions and millions of people died. The economies of Europe were shattered, and the consequences of World War I eventually led to World War II. So a major event. And, the major themes of World War I, obviously, is, the Industrial Revolution meets warfare. Modern warfare it exists now. We're now using machine guns and cannons that are 200,000 pounds. We're talking about 100 years prior to that. Cannons are about 250 pounds. Now we're talking about 200,000, well, probably more than 250, like 2,000 pounds maybe. But now these cannons are about 200,000 pounds. They're ship cannons, but they're on the field. They're brought by trains. We're talking about airplanes, machine gun power, Gatling guns,
primitive tanks,
gas, landmines. We're talking about an entire new flavor of warfare that was very brutal and that massacred and slaughtered millions and millions and millions of people. And I think that the subject of World War I is getting a lot more interest because there was a major film that was produced recently, 1917. I still have yet to see it, but I want to step back and talk about the origins of World War I, not necessarily the warfare, but like what exactly led to this war, because I think it's good to reflect on how these things end up happening, and are these things avoidable? Are these like catastrophes in human society avoidable at all, or do they just take on a life of their own when they start to happen? But I think in a sentence, like, what did you learn in history class, Danny, when it came to World War I? Did you spend much time on it? Did your teachers, did you kind of just skip by it and be like, okay, there was this gas mask in World War II. This is the juicy stuff. Oh, atomic bombs, Hitler,
right.
Nazis.
All I learned was that some prince was killed and it pissed a bunch of people off, and then everybody went to war with each other about it. That's literally all of it.
And that's kind of what most people are taught within World War One. What we're typically taught in history class is the alliance system. So the European powers were all in this alliance system, meaning if one country was attacked, their allies would have to join in. So to set the stage up, Serbia was allied with Russia, which in turn would protect it from Austria. Austria, and I'm talking about the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was allied with the German Empire. And Russia was allied with France against the threat of a German attack. In theory, this alliance system was meant to be a deterrent. However, it actually just turned Europe into a big tripwire bomb. Because if any of these countries were to go to war with each other, a chain of reaction would go off and then everything would turn to shit.
Well, what's the difference between, like, say, those alliances then and alliances like NATO today? Do you think that we're in a tripwire now by having those mutual defense treaties?
So, I mean, you can certainly make that argument about these defense treaties like NATO bringing us into war, especially in the case of NATO's expansion into Eastern Europe and expanding closer to Russian interest. However, the major difference now is that, you know, we live in a world today that the United States dominates the world. Like, the U.S. is the empire. Back then, there were many empires. There were many powers. There were many first-rate powers. It wasn't just the U.S.
Right.
So you had this tripwire bomb powder keg that was set up because everyone had the ability to kill each other. It wasn't just like the U.S. can come in and kill each other. I mean, now you can argue it's a lot worse just because we have nuclear bombs and are able to, you know, realistically
destroy the whole planet.
Destroy a state within a matter of a couple of hours with a couple of nuclear weapons. However, I think it's a little different. But like all parallels, you know, none of them are perfect matches. You know, there's going to be similarities and there's going to be differences. But when you start talking about World War I, you got to start off by talking about how, you know, the no one touches on this. The decline of the Ottoman Empire is a major theme of this war. So the reason why this alliance system was so risky was because it associated Europe's most unstable regions. And these unstable regions in Europe were the Balkans, the Balkans area in southeastern Europe.
Right.
So the de facto power in that region for hundreds of years was the Ottoman Empire. However, the Ottomans were a declining power at that time. So throughout the 1800s, within the Balkans, these states, they started transitioning from Ottoman provinces to vassal states to independent kingdoms to sovereign states. And with the decline of the Ottomans, Austria-Hungary and Russia started filling those power gaps within that power vacuum. So the Ottomans are declining, so you have other powers that are moving in and trying to get their interest in. The major players are being the ones that share borders. Russia on the east, and then you have Austria-Hungary. They start competing for interest within those Balkan states, and those regions that they were competing with, or they were competing in, or competing for, excuse me. There were many different nationalities that shared that space, which included Slavs, which included Germans, Bosnians, Hungarians, Romanians, and Bulgarians. It made things incredibly difficult to control.
Well, it's starting to sound pretty familiar. Sounds a lot to me like the Middle East. We had like some powerful countries in the Middle East, and once those countries were toppled, then we've got a pretty diverse set of peoples, with different cultures and competing interests and things like that, and then a bunch of giant superpowers trying to wane influence over them.
Yeah, that's the common comparison that you're typically hearing, is that the Middle East is the Balkans of World War I. Like, it's the modern day Balkans, or vice versa. When they refer to, when you're trying to explain the Balkan region in the early 20th century, you compare it to the Middle East, which is a fair comparison. A lot of nationalistic movements, a lot of sectarian division. In the case of the Balkans, it was more of a a national division, an ethno-language division.
Right, rather than a theocratic or like a religious divisions.
But the major theme is though is that a power declined, and it's the Ottoman Empire. It's the same empire that declined within the Middle East that made everything pretty crazy when they declined.
Right.
All these states are creating. The Ottoman Empire that stretched from the Middle East all the way over to the Balkans. It was a very, very vast, large amount of territory. So that when that started to decline, they governed a really, really large body of ethnic sectarian groups. They divided them into different provinces, and when they declined, you have kind of like a crazy situation because there's different ethnic groups within different borders or different sovereign borders, which cause resentment within the homeland of those countries. Now, you got to start with Serbia because obviously they were Serbian nationalists, and Austria declares war on Serbia to officially kick off the war. And Serbia at that time, during the start of World War I, was a cauldron of ultra-nationalist sentiment. So there were secret societies that were promoting this idea of a greater Serbia. And this idea was a pseudo-mystical, ultra-nationalist narrative, and it was based on the idea of restoring the old Greater Serbia of the Ottoman Empire. So in the mind of the Serbian nationalists, this was a really glorious chapter in history. So back in the 1300s, the Serbian Empire, it covered most of the Balkan Peninsula. However, there was internal strife. There was the empire was divided, and it ended tragically with Prince Lazar of Serbia heroically fighting to the last breath at the Battle of Kosovo. He was fighting off Turkish Janissaries. Mm-hmm. And it was just a legend that was really mystified, or an historical event that was in Serbian poetry, it was just a common story, and it was I guess a common narrative within the Serbian nationalists. Now, the problem of the idea of a Greater Serbia was that the expansive concept of what Greater Serbia was kind of unclear, or extremely intrusive, rather. So some of these radicals, they considered every spot on which a Serbian Orthodox church that ever existed Serbian territory. So there's this famous quote, and I forget exactly what it is. I'm paraphrasing it. It's wherever a Serb is, that is Serbia. That was a type of ultra-nationalist behavior, or the ultra-nationalist narratives that were going on within the country. Like, we're here to liberate all Serbs. We're here to be the protectorates of all Serbs within the Balkans, and wherever a Serb is, that is Serbia. So it creates quite the issue when we're talking about multiple nationalities and ethno-language groups living in the same area.
All right. Well, bringing it back to like modern times, the first thing I'm thinking about when you're describing, this idea of, these Serbian nationalists and the idea of a greater Serbia, I'm not going to lie, it kind of sounds a lot to me like ISIS and creating a new caliphate. Sounds like pretty similar. I mean, the caliphate was, pre-modern history. They wanted to start that up again. They had a very, nationalist, I guess not necessarily nationalist, but like theocratic approach to it, which would be the difference there. But they want the entire caliphate to be, stretching wherever there was Muslims, basically.
To me, the greater concept is a lot more parallel with modern day Israel than ISIS, because there's historic ties that are based off theology to that land, and it's the historic homeland of the Jews. It sounds a lot more. I think the parallel is a lot closer to Israeli nationalism than ISIS, because ISIS was like purely bent off just Sharia law expansion of the caliphate and redoing the borders of I mean, you can make both comparisons, but I kind of see Israel as a better comparison. However, so back to Serbia, how did all this start happening. So, so through the 1800s, when the Ottoman Empire was in decline, Serbia was basically ran by either one or another rival family at any given time. So there was I'm going to butcher these names, the Karađović family and the Ibrahimović dynasties. And basically, these two dynasties, they ruled Serbia from the period from when it was from an Ottoman territory to when it became an independent kingdom for about 100 years. It started with the Karađović dynasty. They are the ones who initially rebelled against the Ottomans. The rebellion was put down. There was a new ruler that was put in place, and then both of these families kind of had claims to the throne, and they assassinated each other. There was all these political machinations. There was coups pretty much every decade, or even shorter than that. We're talking about like ancient Rome type level of turnaround within the executive office. The turnover would be very quickly between these two families. One ruler would be assassinated, another family wouldn't put in place. In turn, another would resign because of unpopular sentiment or out of forced resignation. It was incredibly unstable. And that was Serbia for about 100 years. And by 1903, so we're going into the end of the 19th century or early 20th century, there was a very unpopular leader named King Alexander on the Obrenović side. And at this time, Serbia was behind the rest of Europe economically. And this guy had a very unpopular wife as well, who was about 10 years his senior, and who also was rumored to have slept around a lot. There's quotes from his own cabinet saying how we
got with her.
Yeah, we had sex with your queen type thing, and where it caused all types of problems because it's never a good look. Imagine if Prince William married a porn star or something like that who was 10 years older than him. It wouldn't be a good look for the royal family.
So sounds like a Game of Thrones episode to me.
Yeah, she was 10 years a senior. I don't think she was much of a handsome woman either. She wasn't a handsome woman. It just wasn't a good look. But besides that, a lot of people saw him as pro-Austrian. They saw the entire family as pro-Austrian stooges. And he exiled his father, who was actually popular with the military. There was a lot of failed government projects that were going on. His father was a monster as well. However, at the very least, he was popular within the ranks of the military. He lost that support when he exiled him. And eventually, this guy is murdered. He's murdered along with his wife. And it's not just your average assassination that takes place in 1903, but it is a full-on military coup, Gaddafi level of violence.
Oh,
so
geez.
we're talking about not like someone slipping cyanide into your drink and you're dying. I don't know what death feels like from cyanide. I don't think it's that painful. I think it's kind of quick. That's why people commit suicide with cyanide after.
It probably sucks,
that's why the Nazis,
but moreover,
were doing it.
It's not so bad to look at.
Yeah, so this was a full-on, incredibly violent assassination of this family. We're talking about a military coup that busts into the palace, starts shooting up royal guards, starts executing cabinet members. And then when they eventually kill them, they start mutilating the bodies. So stabbing the bodies full of wounds, and they take both of them naked. They toss them out the balcony into the garden. It basically is a sign that we're running this country now.
Jesus.
So they toss them out. It's really horrific. And the whole world was mortified by this event. Like a royal family was just assassinated.
Brutally.
And it was frontline news. So it was also
kind of important to talk about the fact that, in this time we still had like kings and queens and shit, right? So when news about some king and queen getting brutally murdered, and tossed into the garden and shit, it makes those monarchs feel a little bit uneasy because, it might, I don't know, promote some ideas within their own borders about doing crazy shit like that as well.
Yeah,
monarchs
absolutely.
are usually a little like, precarious about their
a lot of monarchs were against the French Revolution. When it's when you start killing royals, you're like, oh shit, we're vulnerable, type thing going on. However, I guess to some degree, the king of Serbia, the king and queen of Serbia, they were new countries. They were just granted total independence at the Congress of Berlin in about 25 years. I think the Congress of Berlin's like 1873 or so. They're kind of new, so I'm sure they weren't looked upon as first rate. The other royal families are all related to each other. Like, Kaiser Wilhelm is the grandchild of Queen Victoria. So, and
he's also cousins with the Russian Tsar.
Yeah, they're cousins with the British royal family. They're all related. I don't think there's any direct connection. However, I digress. So when this happens, this is obviously pretty scary for the Austrians. Now, the Austro-Hungarian Empire at this time, they had an empire that included 11 different ethno-language groups. So
that's crazy.
This included, we're talking about Germans,
Germans,
Hungarians, Polish, Slavs, Serbs. There's 11 different ones. But yes, this included Slavs and Serbs. And Austria felt that succession of the Serbs would unravel the entire empire. So they were scared that one ethnic group would succeed from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And then when that would happen, everything would just start rolling out. Everyone would start demanding their own independence. And they had kind of a weird system where the Germans had most of control, but they had like a parliamentary system as well that kind of balanced out power, but still the German side had more of the power.
Right.
It was like a system that was doomed to collapse. And the Russians at this time, the Russians were kind of encouraging the Serbs to do this, and they were linked to a lot of these secret societies in Serbia. Russian influence.
Wow, so it goes back all the way to the World War I.
The Russian influence, and the Serbians they started to. So let me peel this back because I kind of skipped something. So the new government that was put in place after the assassination of King Alexander, it was a military clique. And they replaced the pro-Austrian government with an anti-Austrian government.
Makes sense.
Now, remember that these are rival dynasties that are going back, these two families that are competing for power. So this new government pursued a pro-Russian policy, a pan-Slavist policy, and these networks of secret societies start springing up all across Serbia. And the goal was the liberation of the Serb subjects of Austria. And the way I like to think of these secret societies, and this is the prelude to the Black Hand, the group that eventually assassinates his Archduke Ferdinand. I kind of think of them as...
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, I mean, come on, guys. If you don't know the end of the movie at this point, then there's why you even... I'm surprised you're even interested enough to listen to a history podcast, or history/geopolitical podcast. But I like to think of them kind of like a CIA type group where they do a lot of secret stuff, smuggling, gun running, supporting rebels type things. Think of the nefarious things that the CIA does, like supporting the Contras in Nicaragua or supporting the Mujahideen, like that type of stuff. That was their role. And also to threaten the executive power of Serbia as well.
Right.
But these were filled with radicals, and the radicals who believed in this concept of a greater Serbia. And the problem is that this comes at the expense of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And again, the Austro-Hungarian Empire is an empire with many different ethnic groups, and this worried them. They didn't want everything to unravel. Now, the Russian influence, the Russians were kind of encouraging Serbs to do this, and they were linked to a lot of these secret societies in Serbia. A lot of these guys who were in these societies were at one point exiled by the monarch in Serbia before they were assassinated, and they spent time in Russia. They were kind of... Some of them were radicalized by the concept of, pan-Slavism and all that. Not all of them, but some of them were. And Serbia at that point started expanding. Mm-hmm. So after 1903, there was two wars. There were the Balkan Wars, where Serbia essentially doubled in size. And the Balkan Wars is when all these countries started they got together and they basically kicked there was 2 Balkan wars. The first one, they kicked out the Turks, the remaining remnants of the Ottoman Empire out of the Balkan Peninsula, and then there was another one where they all ganged up on Bulgaria. But I have a quote from the foreign minister from Russia at the time. He said that Serbia has only gone through the first stage of her historic road, and for the attainment of her goal must still endure a terrible struggle in which her whole existence may be at stake. The future of the inevitable struggle.
That's an important part, the inevitable struggle.
The inevitable struggle. So Serbia is destined to grow and go through this historic road to liberate Slavs, is the way that I kind of read that. And I mean, it seemed like there was a lot of Russian influence between these nationalist groups and Russian nationals. Now,
fucking Russia interfering in other people's elections.
All right, let's not go there. So the radicals do step up their activity later, later on as we get closer to the outbreak of the war or prior to the war. And these ultra-nationalist societies, they started increasing their activities outside of Serbia, which is a big problem. And they're increasing their activities in Austrian provinces, specifically those of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the most radical of these groups was led by a colonel named Dragutin Dimitrija.
That's a pretty cool name.
Also known as the Abyss. I just call him the Abyss.
The Abyss.
The Abyss. Like the Abyss. And this was, he was the founder of the Union or Death or the Black Hand, as this more popular, what is the more popular name for it. And he happened to be one of the main plotters of the 1903 coup, so the one that happened in Serbia. So at this time, he was the foremost expert in European regicide. He was the guy. He was the
Kingslayer.
He was the Kingslayer. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So Franz Joseph of Austria, he was the current king. He, at this time, he had been king since 1848.
That's a really long time.
We're at 1913, 1914. This guy was ancient. He was old. And his nephew, the heir, Franz Ferdinand, was the guy who had the real power. So kind of think of if you think of Saudi Arabia,
yeah,
you think
I was just gonna say that. Yeah,
King Salman. Mm-hmm. His I forget his exact age, but he's in his 80s, and I think he, from what I've heard, he has stages. He's in a stage of dementia to some degree, so he's not really all there. So Mohammed bin Salman actually, does the majority of leading in that country. Like he's the power. It's kind of like a situation like that where Franz Ferdinand was really, really old. And, excuse me, not Franz Ferdinand. Franz Joseph was really old, and his heir was kind of running shot.
Right.
And something that Franz Ferdinand was really concerned about was the ethnic problem within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And he was looking to reform things. So the way that he wanted to reform things was either...
This was his Vision 2030 or whatever, right?
Yeah, a Vision 2030 type thing, but more geared on easing tensions between national groups. He wanted to do it by a direction of federalism for the different national groups, or through the creation of a Slavic component of the empire.
So like
however, the problem would be that these concessions, they would ruin the concept of the Greater Serbia. So this is why Franz Ferdinand became a target by these ultranational groups within Serbia.
So I'm getting like Houthi vibes from this, from the Serbs, not Houthi. Oh, help me out here. Kurdish vibes from this, right? You know, there are some Kurds who want a Kurdistan, like a greater Kurdistan. And the idea of, you know, creating smaller independent principalities within different states that were, you know, somewhat semi-autonomous for the Kurds, it is for those specific Kurds that want a greater Kurdistan kind of like unacceptable.
Yeah, you can make it. You can make a comparison really to any ethno-national group or anyone who's kind of who was demanding a state or trying to expand their state. The Kurds don't have a state. The difference is the Serbs did have a state,
right?
And they're seeing themselves as liberators of Serbs and Slavs who are outside of their borders. So naturally, they need to expand. And their concept of expansion doesn't really have a limit because it's based off kind of a mystical legend type thing. Wherever there's a Serb, that is Serbia. You know, wherever there's Serbian
home is
Orthodox
where the heart
churches,
is.
that is Serbia. So that's
right.
the major problem, is that it's like a mystical national take on their borders. They're not recognizing sovereign borders, and with these national groups in place, they wanted to expand until they felt they liberated all these Serbians. And you know, that's one of the big dangers of this type of national tribalism or ethnic tribalism, when you want to expand your borders at the expense of other borders or at the expense of other peoples. And that's kind of what happened. And I'm not trying to throw Serbia I'm not trying to throw them under the bus as far as starting a war. I'm just trying to draw parallels to different nationalistic groups or different times in our current times.
You're just calling out what's problematic about nationalism.
Yeah, I'm just calling out, like, you know, what were the things that stirred the pot and what led to the eventual assassination of Franz Ferdinand. But in the spring of 1914, the Serbian nationals, who were agents of the Black Hand, they recruited a team of young Bosnian fanatics to kill Archduke Ferdinand. And you know, they were trained in Belgrade in Serbia, and they were provided with guns, they were provided with bombs, they were provided with cyanide to kill themselves after they did it, and then they were smuggled across the border. And on June 28th, 1914, they killed him. They killed him and his wife in the streets of Sarajevo. And, you know, of course, we know Gavrilo Princip was the shooter who later died in prison, I think of pneumonia. But that's kind of what led to the eventual assassination of the Archduke. So this kind of grand idea of a greater Serbia and the reforms that he wanted to do that would unravel their ultimate national goals is what led to it. Now, this was scary not only because the heir of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was assassinated, but I mean, now it's kind of like a real threat on your border. Like, there's an expanding state that recently doubled in size that is that's hyper aggressive and that's has a high nationalistic tendency, and they just assassinated your leader, and they have these secret societies. It's you can't blame the Austro-Hungarians for reacting the way they did. And of course they blame Serbia for this, even though, you know, there was not an official tie or an official link at the time of the murder. And what they ended up doing is that they gave Serbia a list of demands that they obviously couldn't abide by, and they also got the green light from Germany to invade Serbia. And
well, even before that, I think Germany was egging him on to send them the ultimatum, and that was kind of the troubling part, because Germany's obviously in this alliance with Austria, and they're basically like, you got to make a stand about this. Like, don't let them push you around. Don't show weakness. Like, go for it. But you know, we're going to talk about Germany in a second here, and kind of their their hand in all of this. But one thing that I learned about it was that while Germany did kind of egg on Austria to go ahead and send that ultimatum, they had no idea that the demands of the Austro-Hungarian Empire to the Serbians were going to be so completely ridiculous, right? Like, if I remember correctly, some of the things that they were asking of Serbia, the demands that they wanted was like, we want you to fire, random people that work in your government and public sectors that we just don't like. And also, we want to be able to, operate our basically our military and our security folks within your borders, right? And that would be like infringing on Serbian sovereignty. The types of demands that they asked for in that ultimatum were unacceptable for anyone. And so while Germany did certainly egg them on, I think what's important to remember is that they didn't draft this ultimatum, and they also neglected to ask to see the ultimatum before they sent it along. So that's an error on their part for sure. And some other context that I learned about this was that, we talked about earlier that there was a lot of these big superpowers. There's a lot of big countries, but Austria-Hungary wasn't considered one of these big, powerful countries. As a matter of fact, a lot of other countries saw them as an empire in decline, right? And when they sent along the ultimatum, they didn't even read that shit. They didn't take it seriously because they just quite frankly didn't believe in the power and in the authority and in the sovereign rights of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the first place, right? So there was a lot of like negative ideas about Austria-Hungary even before Franz Ferdinand was killed, So Austria basically felt emboldened to make a stance and say like, well, fuck, these other countries don't respect us. And, this Serbian, basically terrorist group, in their opinion, came and murdered our, crown prince, who was working on trying to, basically quell a lot of these ethnic divides. Germany's got our back, so let's go hard or go home, And there's a lot of shit going on there.
There was a famous quote from a German general. I forgot who it was during the war, but Austria, they suffered a lot of defeats, and Serbia whacked them in the beginning of the war. Even Serbia kind of punches above their weight class in terms of warfare.
Right. Because they were a smaller country. They were
a much smaller country. They were out. They were much smaller. And they whacked them in the beginning of the war. And the famous quote is that the Germans said they're tied to a corpse.
Austria-Hungary was the corpse there.
Yeah, they're tied to a corpse because the Germans would have to constantly bail them out in the war over and over again. And also because we're talking about 11 different ethno-national groups, there would be reports of like the Slavics who would put down their weapons and join the Russians and stuff like that. So there was a lot of that going on. It wasn't an ideal situation, but going back to Germany, I have a quote from a historian, Ralph Rako, and he has a pretty insightful context about this. Scholars have now available to them the diary of Kurt Reisler, private secretary to the German Chancellor, Bethmann Hollweg. From this and other documents, it becomes clear that Bethmann Hollweg's position in the July crisis was a complex one. If Austria were to vanish as a power, Germany would be threatened by rampant pan-Slavism, supported by growing Russian power in the east and by French revanchism in the west. By prompting the Austrians to attack Serbia immediately, he hoped that the conflict would be localized and the Serbian menace nullified. The Chancellor, too, understood that the Central Powers were risking a continental war, but he believed that if Austria acted swiftly, presenting Europe with a rapid fait accompli, the war would be confined to the Balkans and the intervention of third parties avoided as much as possible. In this way, the German-Austrian alliance could emerge with a stunning political victory that might split the Entente and crack Germany's encirclement. So I think Germany, one of the major reasons why they gave this the green light is because you have to remember that Germany is encircled. So where they are physically on a map,
it's literally Central Europe.
Literally,
like you can't get any more central. Yeah,
you can't, especially in 1914. On the east you have Russia, and on the west you have France. You're literally encircled. They're both allies with each other. So a lot of people blame Germany for being paranoid during the First World War I about this encirclement, but they weren't paranoid. They were encircled.
Right.
They absolutely were encircled, and they were risking a two-front war no matter what. And the growing populations of Russia and Pan-Slavism, they wanted to nip that in the butt as soon as possible. So that's why I think they gave them the green light, because they didn't want the concept of Pan-Slavism to grow within the Balkans and ultimately become a threat to them, especially if the Austrians fell. They would be a lone country in the middle of Europe with nothing but enemies in their eyes. So I think they wanted to nip that situation in the butt as soon as possible.
Right. They wanted to Soleimani them, like they wanted to take it out before it became a problem.
So another quote I have from Ralph Raico. So the Austrians have believed that vigorous action against Serbia and a promise of German support would deter Russia. The Russians have believed that a show of strength against Austria would both check the Austrians and deter Germany. In both cases, the bluff had been called. Russia, and through its support of Russia, France, as well as Austria and Germany, was quite willing to risk war in July 1914.
I want to talk about that, actually, because, that's totally true. I think, everybody was using these alliance systems as a deterrent for war, and they felt, whenever shit went down, they would lean on that mutually assured destruction of the time to beat off the specter of war. But, what I think we haven't covered, and what's missing here is that, that worked for a little while, but by the time leading up to this, and probably for a few decades beforehand, there was this popular opinion among all of Europe, all the European countries, that war was imminent, that it was going to happen eventually, and that because of that, what they believed was a fact, that war would eventually happen, they didn't welcome war, they didn't want war, but they felt, okay, war's going to happen anyway, so let's not be on the losing side. And what this did was it sprung up a really big arms race, right? Everybody started developing, weapons. I think, just previous to this, Germany's defense spending had spiked considerably. They got to like 3.8% of their GDP, which was super high at the time, in military spending. And countries all over Europe were using the specter of war as a means, like as a rationality to, bolster their military budgets all over Europe, right? And so everybody is locking and loading for a couple decades leading up to this. And then we hit this one situation, and now, Austria and Hungary are bluffing, with their ultimatum. The Russians are bluffing with their show of strength, and as Ralph Raico points out, that you just read, they were both willing to go to war by that point because they felt that they had. I mean, there's a number of factors, but they had already been building up their arm.
The second quote is by James Joel. Sorry about
James
that.
Joel. Sorry. But you hear what I'm saying on that? It's like everybody in Europe already assumed that a war was going to happen eventually. And so they were planning for this eventuality, right? And, the clock just ran out on the effectiveness of the mutually assured destruction of the alliance system by this point.
Yeah, and remember, so the alliance system that's set up right now is you have Germany and Austria, and then you have Russia, France, and Serbia. So it's tripwire. So Austria declares war on Serbia,
right?
And then Russia declares war on Austria. Germany declares war on Russia. France declares war on Germany. So that's the tripwire.
Right.
Dominoes. So it's a domino effect. It's a powder keg. And yes, all these countries are competing with each other Now we got to remember it's kind of funny, and now I'm kind of just pontificating and I'm thinking out loud. Why is there a major isolation? And obviously the British joined the war effort as well, and we'll get to that in a second. On the side of the Entente,
the Triple Entente,
the Triple Entente, and Italy was actually in the Central Powers as well, prior, but they left to join the winning side.
Right.
But why did they form a unity in the first place? I think it's because Germany mainly was a new country. Germany was brand new at the time. They were kind of an upstart.
Mm-hmm.
And all these other empires, you have the British Empire, the French Empire, and the Russian Empire. They all have a bit of a legacy going on. They have all been around in a while, and more importantly, they are around when they at the best time to start scooping up colonial possessions. So I think that you have kind of it's the battle of the imperialist versus the militarist, kind of,
yeah.
In a nutshell. And I know I'm kind of being this is like a really super simple way to explain it, but it's a battle of the upstarts versus the new bloods versus the old bloods, and
right.
The new bloods, they're trying to confiscate for their lack of colonial possessions by having these humongous armies. Like the German army at that time was a fucking menace.
Right.
Like
as I mentioned, they were doing 3.8% of their GDP every year for just their military, which is super high for military spending at the time.
They were a menace. They were the best army in the world at that time,
mm-hmm.
by far. Like, there's no comparison. They took the Prussian military culture and they expanded upon it with a bigger population with all of Germany.
Right.
And what Germany's plan was in this case, if a war started, in the case that they were in a two-front war, was something called, and this is like argued among historians if this plan ever existed or not, the Schlieffen Plan. But I think it existed, as far as I know. There's like enough record on it, I feel. But it was by a general named Alfred von Schlieffen Plan. And basically, they were the war plans. If Germany ever got into a two-front war with Russia and France, it was the plan. It was drawn up before World War I even started. It was drawn up like 2-3 years ago. And this guy, Alfred von Schlieffen, was obsessed with this plan. Like, he would... let me explain what this is. And I know you know what it is as well. So
right.
The plan is that... So Russia would take a while to mobilize because they're big and clunky.
Also, their country is massive.
Their country is massive, and they still had serfdom at that time.
Yeah.
They were a bit behind the other countries. So their plan was to knock out France as soon as possible. But the problem is that France and Germany's border was heavily fortified. The border is not even that long. The border between France and Germany, I forget the exact mile, but
it's not that big.
It's heavily, heavily fortified. So you can't just march over to France. Not at that time.
Right. And again, to point out, like, everybody in Europe had the idea that war was going to happen at some point, and they had been stockpiling weapons and fortifying their borders for years. So, yeah, it
was a timing thing.
Right.
It was a timing thing. It's like, war's going to break out. Do we have the advantage to win this war right now? Okay, let's do it now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what happened. Like, this major spark happened, and all these countries are like, we're all going to go to war anyway. We might as well just do it now. And, all these...
That was definitely Germany's position, for sure.
Yeah, that was definitely Germany's position. And, they felt they had the cards in place to pull this Schlieffen Plan off. But the Schlieffen Plan was that they were going to go into Belgium that was neutral and basically flank the French. Right. So they were going to go up to Belgium, and then they were going to bring their army down like a hammer down into France, into northern France. And then there was going to be another force that would go into central France, and they were supposed to meet. But the large blunt hammer of the force was coming through Belgium.
Right,
and that was their plan to win the war.
It was a pretty
quickly.
good plan when you think about it, because, you know, again, that French border was heavily fortified, right? Because they were in an alliance against Germany. So they were heavily fortifying that border. They weren't heavily fortifying their border with Belgium, because Belgium is a neutral country, right? So they weren't expecting Belgium to do anything about it, and they certainly weren't expecting Germany to go through Belgium.
But they also kind of were expecting it to happen as well. They knew it. This guy Alfred von Schlieffen, apparently he was spending his holidays in Belgium just so he could like
Scope it out.
Yeah, so he could scope it out, and just, you know, he knew exactly what the battlefields would look like. And apparently when he died, he was talking about the Schlieffen plans, like, as he died. He was like, remember the Dan Carlin does a podcast on this, and if you guys haven't listened to it, listen to the Blueprint of Armageddon, where he really nails into this topic like really hard, like everything with the Schlieffen plan. But he was going on holidays there, and his dying words, like, he just lived for the Schlieffen plan. He lived for it. He was, I need to see my Schlieffen plan. I need to see it.
He was like the guy that played football in high school, and he was like the quarterback, and, like, you know, for the game winner, that last game of the season before he graduated high school, he, you know, did a Hail Mary play, and it, like, pulled it off, and, like, that's what he talked about for the rest of his life. And, like, on his deathbed, he was talking about that one Hail Mary play that he tossed the winning ball.
So the British, they have to go through Belgium, and they do that. So they do exactly that. They go up into Belgium, and then there's something called the Rape of Belgium that happens, where they start killing civilians. They start occupying Belgium, and there's resistance, and they do things like, the Germans do things like indiscriminately kill civilians in villages where there's sniper fire. Mm-hmm. Or if there's somebody who blows up a bridge, they'd go and they'd kill, you know, they believed in collective punishment in Germany. It's like an old Prussian thing. So it was very harsh. Now, what happens is that this is terrible PR. This lands in Britain. The British press spins this, and they're like,
the Germans are killing everybody.
The Germans are killing everyone. They start playing this up. They're like, this is really, really bad. And, you know, the propaganda goes out, and, you know, they start portraying the Germans like, you know, animals and stuff like that, like apes, or, you know, just like kind of warmongering animals. So a lot of propaganda starts getting circulated in the British press. And the British at this time, they also had a handshake deal with France, that if France ever fought a war, then the British would come in and they would get their back on it. And it was a handshake deal. It wasn't a formal treaty like how France and Russia had one together. It was something that was built out of like imperial pursuits and stuff like that. It wasn't a true like military alliance. And you also have to remember that the majority of history between France and Britain was antagonistic.
Right.
You know, it was only 100 years ago that Duke of Wellington defeated Napoleon. So it was most of there was contempt for each other to some degree on each side between the British and the French. And the French were like, fuck, what are we going to do? The Germans are the British going to are they going to come in, and are they going to join the war front? Now, they used the Belgium thing, the occupation of Belgium, as the pretext to join the war on the side of the French. Now, the British had I don't want to get too far into the British stuff because it's like it warrants its own conversation, but there was a huge arms race between the Brits and the Germans going on, and it specifically was their naval race. So it was like the dreadnought race, where they were building these huge ships, and for every single German ship, the British would build two, and eventually they were going to duke it out because of this huge naval race that they were having. So they used it, the war powers, or the war party at B, they used that pretext to go in and to pounce on Germany, mm-hmm. and to nip that in the butt. But they all had all these countries had their reasons, and they all, not good reasons, but they all had their pretexts and their foreign policy objectives, and it all was based off timing. like when's the right time to hit each other, to whack each other, because like you said, war was going to happen anyway, so you might as well get the best of your enemy when you can. And they all had their different fears. The Germans was the fear of Russia's population and the encirclement of being right smack in the middle. The Austrians was the expansion of Pan-Slavism. Mm-hmm. The French were really worried about the Germany's population growth and these German states becoming one country, because they had just previously got their ass kicked in a war, in the Franco-Prussian War.
Right.
And they felt threatened by Germany. The British and the Germans were having a naval arms race. So all these countries had their very dumb reasons to start this war, and it was all set off by an assassination by a terrorist group.
Basically, yeah,
a terrorist group that kind of whose philosophy was based off a mystical legend. That's my perception of World War I. There's millions of perceptions that you can have, but I mean, generally, the alliance system did lead to the war, but it took fucked up foreign policies to start these wars in the first place.
Yeah, I'd
mean?
agree with that. I'd almost say that the alliance system didn't help. It was the kind of the gas on the fire, but it certainly wasn't the spark. And what I find so unfortunate about this whole situation is literally that all of these countries in Europe basically had it in their mind that war was going to happen regardless, and rather than think of ways to avert war, they just doubled down on, all right, we're going to go to war, so let's build more guns, more tanks, more boats, more everything, before we get our asses kicked. And that's, in my opinion, what set off this war. That I see that as more consequential, because it's possible that if they had thought, okay, it's a bad idea to go to war, like if Germany had the foresight to say, it's a bad idea for us to egg on Austria-Hungary to send that ultimatum and eventually to, wage war against Serbia or declare war against Serbia. If they had the foresight to think this is going to not end very well, we're going to end up on a two-front war. If they had just had that foresight and rather than making the assumption that shit was going to happen anyway, think of ways to avert the war instead, whether that be diplomatically or otherwise, it could have changed in much in the same way that if Russia had the foresight to think, hey, if we egg on these Serbs and say like, hey, we got your back and we're gonna just go ahead and crush the Germans for you if they get in the way, or hit Austria ahead of time, that would have it could have averted the bloodshed. And what's unfortunate about it is that we talked in the beginning of this about the echoes of World War III and all the memes that are going around, and I see a lot of that now. I see the fact that we have alliance systems of sorts, right? NATO for sure is an alliance system that's like on the books, and some kind of handshake alliance systems, with Russia and say Syria, or Russia and Iran. China's in the mix.
Russia and Syria have a legitimate alliance with each other.
Right. I guess maybe I'm referring more to Iran there.
Russia and Iran is there. More of like, they're not.
It's like a wink and a nod, kind of.
They're not historic friends. Mm-hmm. Like if the U.S. invaded Iran, Russia would not. Russia's not getting up to defend Iran. I can tell you that much. Like if the U.S. decided, they'd be like, okay, Russia would just be like, all right, well, that's their problem. We'll just watch. Maybe we'll sell Iran S-300s, but they wouldn't actually do that.
You never know. In any case, what I'm trying to get at is that I feel like the zeitgeist today is maybe not as extreme as World War I, where literally every country and every person just had the going assumption that war is going to happen eventually. I feel like we're creeping towards that. And when we had that episode, just before the U.S. killed Salami, and we were talking about what's going to be that.
He means Soleimani. We call him Salami.
In case you didn't listen to the last episode.
For short.
We talked about like what's going to be that Franz Ferdinand moment, right? And it's not just the Franz Ferdinand moment, as we've seen, at least so far. We killed Soleimani, and then the Iranians responded. They responded at least, relatively, like it wasn't extreme. Like they intended not to kill anybody with their retaliation. We don't know if that's over or not yet. But if we had this idea in mind, and all the countries involved had this idea in mind that war is imminent and it's gonna happen, you best believe somebody's gonna strike first. And I think that was the really unfortunate part, in looking into World War I again for this show, for me, how everyone just had this going assumption, and in my opinion, that had a greater impact on starting the war than the alliance system itself.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that it was already driven into. I think a lot of it was just calling each other. Everyone misread the situation, and they tried calling each other's bluffs, or they were bluffing, and they didn't realize that the other countries would call their bluffs, and that had to do with their foreign policies of like, hey, these wars are going to be inevitable. We might as well just do it now while we have the upper hand. And I think each country miscalculated their upper hand, because everyone really lost that war. It wasn't, Russia lost that war. Look what happened to them.
Right.
They went communist. Like their society was destroyed, and they ended up with the Bolshevik Party killing the Tsar and his family.
Right.
And
there were definitely no winners. There were losers and bigger losers.
There was losers and bigger losers. There were no winners in that war. The only country that you can see as maybe a winner of that war, I mean, I wouldn't say that, but you could argue it, is the United States, because during that time, there was a huge transfer of wealth from London to New York, because the U.S. was, they were financing the British.
Right, but also they were relatively safe an ocean away.
Yeah, they were ocean away, and the U.S. casualties were horrific in its own case. We're talking about 100,000 people killed in that war, just in such a short time period. They
weren't even in it for the whole time. Yeah,
it was a year of that war, and the casualties were that high when the U.S. joined that war effort.
Yeah,
a lot of wasted life there. However, it wasn't on U.S. borders, so you didn't have the trench lines going down the country, and that millions of soldiers died within Germany, France, and Russia, and Britain. Millions of soldiers died. The U.S. cost was relatively low compared to them, and compared to other wars like World War II, where the U.S. was in the war longer. But if the U.S. was in that war longer, it would have been really bad. Like the casualty rates probably would be pretty comparable to that of World War II.
Right. If you think about 1 year and losing 100,000 soldiers, that's like 2 9/11s a month every month for the whole year. Just think about that.
And they were fighting Germany on their last straw, like a largely kind of worn out Germany at that time. But yeah, there's no winners of that. Germany loses the war officially, but they take land away from them, and they get resentful, and another war starts.
They also put a lot of economic sanctions on them, and they have to pay reparations.
World War II is a direct consequence of the Treaty of Versailles and the punishment that was issued to Germany after the war, because I think it's important to talk about this World War I, because there's a lot of discussion on who started World War I, but I think the discussion should be more so how did it start rather than who started it, because I think every country involved deserves their
share of the blame.
Their share of the blame, because every country probably had some means of de-escalating the situation, and it seemed like every country involved, including Russia, Germany, Austria, France, and Britain, they all did their things to escalate the war, and when they could have, like the British could have probably negotiated some type of deal with colonial possessions or something like that if they really wanted to do it. They didn't do it. The French didn't have to kind of pushed the Russians to join the war because they wanted to annex territory that they previously lost in the Franco-Prussian War. The Germans ultimately, they're the ones who invaded Belgium, a neutral country, and tried to do that big wallop at the end. And, it was their ally who declared war on Serbia. And then, within Russia meddling within Serbian politics and kind of contributing to the pan-Slavism that was going on within the Balkans. It was fostering that type of hyper nationalism. Every country had their share blunt of the war, and every country lost, just like the tremendous loss of life that took place. And we're talking about fucking the worst battlefield conditions, like just living in shit. And
literally
living in shit with rat infestations, lice everywhere, and that's just like the normal everyday living conditions. Like, there's this famous picture. It's like it really hits you hard when you look at it. It's called Hell, and it's by a French artist. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's just called Hell, and it's of this French soldier. And I think it's based off Verdun, the Battle of Verdun, which was a major battle between Germany and France in World War I. One of the biggest battles within the war, if not the biggest, is in terms of loss of life. It's a soldier with a gas mask with a corpse in a landscape that kind of looks like the moon, because he's in like a mortar hole that's filled with liquid and water. It's just kind of a lot of the art that came out at that time. Just the disfigured people.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite, well, not favorite, but some of my favorite paintings from that topic is a German painter by the name of Otto Dix. And this one in particular that I like a lot, it's called The Scat Players, right? It's three, World War I German officers, and they're all sitting at a table playing some card game. I guess it's called Scat, right? And I mean, look it up. It's crazy. It's literally three like disfigured, fucked up, human beings playing this card game, and what it describes and what it shows is the cost of the war. And what was kind of crazy was that field medicine was getting, we talk about all the military technology that was getting good for World War I, but all the field medicine was getting much better as well. And so what they were able to do is they were able to save a lot of people. Unfortunately, they were horribly disfigured. And when they come back home, this is what they look like. Like the picture shows, this one guy that's holding up his cards with his foot, and he's got like some tube coming out of his ear. And then another guy has like, a metal plate or some shit that's on his skull to replace what was missing of his skull. Another one's got like a metal jaw, and no legs, and it's just, it's graphic. And it really just shows like how terrible it was to be in that war, and how fucked up it must have been to have survived it for some people, because their loss of limb is an understatement for what happened.
And not only that, but the mental damage as well.
Absolutely.
There's a famous picture. It's of a shell-shocked British soldier in a trench, and if you haven't seen it, just type in shell-shocked soldier or World War I if you typed in shell-shocked soldier, it'll probably be the first thing that pops up. But it's of this guy who's undergoing a severe amount of trauma. Obviously, he's smiling. It's just kind of like the dead, haunting smile with his helmet like tilted over. Yeah. And
I've seen that photo,
it's during I think during an artillery raid. It's just something that kind of peers into your soul. It's like really, really a haunting image to look at. And that was the war. Like that war was just a devastating tragedy that happened over, fucked up power politics that were taking place within Europe. And I think you got to reflect on the human toll of what fucked up foreign policies end up doing to just entire generations of people. Like, look at look at a lot of the writing that came out of Britain at that time and France. Like, a lot of it's super depressing. Like, even the U.S. There's so many writers that came out, kind of writing based off their experiences.
Didn't Tolkien get popular out of the World War I there? He started writing.
Tolkien was he was a scholar, and he was a linguistics professor, I believe. Mm-hmm. People compare him to George R. R. Martin.
Well,
however,
the other
he
way
was
around.
more.
Yeah,
they compare them together, but they're very different when you think about it. Like J.R.R. Tolkien, they both lived very different lives. Like George R. R. Martin, I love George R. R. Martin, by the way, but he, he was a Hollywood writer, screenwriter type guy. Who wrote like a lot of science fiction and stuff, and like just like a career writer who wrote like just massive amounts of stuff. And then J.R.R. Tolkien was a veteran of World War I, and he was in a club with a lot of other like famous young scholars, and all of them died except him. Mm-hmm. And he served a lot of time in the trenches. In World War I, and I think he was eventually removed. I forget the exact story, but I think he was removed from a severe case of lice from the trenches. I could be wrong about that, or trench foot or something like that. I forget the exact story, but a lot of people kind of claim that a lot of his writing on World War I or a lot of his writing on Lord of the Rings was based off his experience in World War I.
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I guess you could say there's definitely some themes.
I mean, the Battle of Helm's Deep sounds like something straight out of a World War I scene, so it's possible.
I think that one of the there's the ending when the Eagles are coming, mm-hmm. when the Eagles kind of come out of nowhere to save Frodo and Sam.
That's supposed to be representative of the United States, right?
Yeah, mm-hmm. But I don't. Maybe. I mean, I'm assuming he kind of based Mordor off what a World War I battlefield would look like when you think of a description, because those fucking battlefields certainly look like, it certainly seemed like Mordor, like the moon.
Right.
If you guys haven't listened to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History on his series on World War I, you guys should listen to that immediately. It's great.
Also, make sure you have about 7 hours of time to dedicate to it, because it's super long.
Like 30, like more like 36 hours of time. That shit's like that. It's like a 6-part series, and each episode's 3 to 4 hours long.
Yeah,
it's very, very long. But yeah, I think good discussion on this topic is good, and kind of understanding what the hell happened and how that global crisis and how the world went mad for 4 years, which led to the war going insane again shortly after during World War II, as a direct consequence, should be reviewed and I think reflected on a lot when thinking about modern day foreign policy. So do you want to transition into foreign policy? Just some quick stuff
to kind of follow up. Stuff that happened.
Right. Mm-hmm. So first thing is first, I want to talk about that plane.
The Iranian plane that.
Yeah. So you actually were absolutely right, and, mm-hmm. and you kind of called it in real time as well, mm-hmm. to your credit. Now that's a tragedy as well.
Yeah.
So
176 lives lost. It was just.
Yeah. Iran shot down that plane by accident because. Obviously, they don't have their shit together, because when you think about it, Damascus gets bombed on a regular basis. They mm-hmm. never accidentally shoot down commercial airlines.
Right. Well, I mean, they've been in a civil war for years now, so I think they don't flinch as easily. Iran hasn't been in an active war for a very long time, so it's they made a really big move, power play against the United States. They, to some would even argue that they were bluffing. In that respect, that was a warning shot.
Well, they decided to destroy equipment rather than personnel,
right? And they were on high alert. It's so fucking unfortunate. But I like you said, man, I called it. I don't know what it's like to be in war, but I can imagine, and I can imagine that the situation on the ground was they saw something that they didn't think was supposed to be there, and they didn't have a whole lot of time to think about it, so they pulled the trigger.
apparently they arrested some people who were involved in that.
Yeah.
But it makes me think of, you ever watched the show Breaking Bad?
I didn't, actually. That's the one series I never got into, but enlighten me.
Spoiler alerts for people who haven't watched Breaking Bad, but it's not, I'm only going to spoil the end of the second season. So, there's, in the beginning of second season of Breaking Bad, there is there's like a, what do you call a cold opening? But it shows like the future, and it shows like the whole season's leading up to that one event. What is that called, like cinematically?
I don't know, but like they show the future first, and then they beat it
so
up,
they're
right?
showing. So it's of a plane that has the debris of a plane in a pool, and you're seeing like stuffed animals and stuff, and it's, you know, remains of the plane in a pool that are floating around, and there's a pink, everything's in black and white except this pink stuffed animal, which kind of like is highlighted. And you eventually go through the season and you kind of find out that what led to the plane crashing, because it's two planes collided with each other, what led to that happening was the events that took place from Walter White and Jesse, like the two main characters of the show. Mm-hmm. And they're both completely unrelated when you think about it, because they're just, you know, they're selling meth. And how does that relate to this airline crash?
Right. Mm-hmm.
But they show the connection of that happening, because what ends up happening is that a girl dies of a drug overdose, and they're both involved in it in some way or another. I'm not going to explain the full details of the show. And her father is an airline controller, and he's under such grief that he accidentally he makes a mistake where the planes collide with each other and all those people die. Mm-hmm. So like they kind of show that event, and I think that's kind of what happened with that plane. You know, that was just a tragedy that didn't need to happen, and it was a direct response. It was a direct consequence of the escalation in foreign policy with Iran. You know, if there was no assassination of Soleimani, that wouldn't have happened in the long run.
Right. And we kind of played this game, you know, in the last episode too, where we went backwards in time for the, you know, the history of events. You know, we can keep going beyond just Soleimani, and we can go all the way back to like the 50s, you know, and there's a tit for tat going on. But I totally agree with you. This is a result of escalations of tensions.
Yeah, and those people didn't like that. It's just such a tragedy. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about as a follow-up was, so, you know, we try to be fair with Trump and all that, and, you know, I'm more of somebody, I would say that I probably defend Trump more than Danny does.
I don't think I defend him very much at all.
Yeah, but I try to give Trump credit when I think he's doing something well. I criticize him harshly when I think he's doing something I don't like. So, you know, there's different scenarios where I either criticize him or I shit on him. And I've been shitting on him lately because I completely disagree with his Iran policy. And this impeachment thing that has been going on, you and I have different opinions on it, but I thought that the impeachment that was brought up by the Democrats on Ukraine, the quid pro quo thing, was complete horseshit. And, you know, the stupid little quid pro quo with a victimless Ukrainian president who says he wasn't even a victim. And I thought the whole thing was retarded. That was the only word I can use for it. Now, you have something where Trump now says, you know, he assassinated a foreign general. He assassinates a foreign general, a political figure. Mm-hmm. So he's not assassinating some ISIS member running around in the desert saying Allah Akbar. He's assassinating a political figure, a popular figure with, at the very least, 50% of the population within Iran. He kills him. And he says he had to do it because he was planning an attack on embassies. So there was an imminent threat, and that's why he had to do that. That's why he had to kill a popular leader with Iran, where a country we're not officially at war with, but we kind of are at war with now at this point. He says it's an imminent threat. Mark Esper comes out and says that there was no evidence of that at all. Mark Esper is like, no, that wasn't going to happen. Now, Mike Lee and Rand Paul both came out.
Yeah, they were very upset
both
about this.
said
Yeah.
that in Mike Lee, I was criticizing Mike Lee before because I generally like Mike Lee a lot.
Right.
He's one of the senators I like.
The bill with him and Bernie Sanders to stop.
Mike Lee was saying that he was excited, like he was supporting the strike on Soleimani, and I was disappointed with him. He came out and he said that the briefing he got from Donald Trump was the worst security briefing he's ever received, ever. In his 9 years as a U.S. Senator, the worst briefing he's ever received.
And a lot of shit happened in the last 9 years. Yeah,
a lot of things happened, and he's not. Mike Lee is gonna. I think he wants to be on the side of Republicans. So for him to say that, I think it's pretty credible of how lousy it was. And Rand Paul came out and said the same thing.
Right
now, how. There was no evidence at all that this guy was going to attack any U.S. target or any U.S. asset. There was zero evidence, zero evidence that this was going to happen. So they lied. They lied about this.
Oh, that's surprising.
I don't understand how this isn't a bigger deal, a much bigger deal than the Ukraine fiascos. Or we're talking about even if everything about Ukraine is real and there was an actual quid pro quo that went on where he was hanging foreign aid over his head and every single thing the Democrats are saying is 100% accurate. This is 100% more alarming than that, regardless.
I mean, what are they going to do? Re-impeach him? I mean, I'm down if you want to, but...
We're having one situation where a U.S. president, commander-in-chief says, all right, let's just kill him. Let's kill this political figure that will. There's a percentage chance that we could get into a war with Iran, or some target could be bombed. We're immediately putting soldiers that we do have and bases in Iraq in danger. Immediately. I mean, they're bombed with ballistic missiles. That could have happened in a different way.
Right.
That could have happened that could have been a lot more tragic than it was, which is good that it wasn't that bad. That could have been a lot worse. He put those guys immediately in danger.
Right. And then also sent a bunch more.
And then he lied about it.
He also sent a bunch more over there and is actively putting them in danger.
So we're talking about the policy, the Trump policy in Iran has been so unbelievably transparently dishonest that I don't understand how you pick a dog. If you're going to pick a fight, you're going to pick a fight with his behavior with Ukraine and not focus 100% of your behavior on 100% of your condemnation on his behavior when it comes to Iran.
I'm going to stop you right there because I agree with your sentiment about that this is much worse, but they didn't happen at the same time. So we're making a false equivalency here. They made a big deal about Ukraine because, in my opinion, and in many people's opinion, it was a big deal. And then he does this other thing that's an even bigger deal. So I think, personally speaking, if you're watching the news, we had news about the Soleimani killing and the bombing nonstop on all the mainstream media. Lots and lots of people are very upset about this. We did have a bunch of people that were supporting the killing of Soleimani. We did have people, that had said that the briefing was perfect and awesome, and we had plenty of reason to go and kill him. But we also have an equal or even greater, I would argue, response to the contrary of that. The thing is, we can address both things. We can totally do both. And my thing is that at this moment we are Pelosi just sent over the articles of impeachment. She picked her managers to prosecute, and it looks like we may be getting a couple witnesses on that Ukraine scandal. And there's been a bunch of shit that's happened since then that we haven't talked about on the show, and certainly not a lot of people have been talking about in general in the news because of this what I would also agree is a bigger deal because it poses an imminent threat, for war. But we can address both. So if you want to go back and like impeach him again, like for almost starting World War III, like sure, let's do that. I'm on board.
I would want to throw out pretty much all of the impeachment, throw that out the table, the Ukraine stuff out the table. Just we're not going to agree on this, so I don't know if it's any point diving further into this. But I think we'll both agree on this point. We'll disagree on the Ukraine stuff, but we'll agree that the Iran thing is a lot more important. Now, I just want to make one more observation about things that have come out in the news. So this plan was an 8-month-old or 7-month-old plan. Mm-hmm. So Soleimani was on a kill list for 7 months at least.
Right. So there's nothing imminent about 7 months ago.
There was nothing imminent. So the story completely changed.
That's on some 6 months away from the nuclear bomb timeline.
it was the list. Mike Pompeo then pivoted. He's like, all right, it wasn't because he was actually going to do anything. We just wanted to send a message to Russia and China.
Which I don't even quite follow that.
What? You're trying to send a message to Russia and China by
killing
assassinating
an Iranian general.
By killing an Iranian general? What the fuck is wrong with you?
Right.
This guy should be thrown out his stuff should be taken, thrown out on the White House lawn, and it should be filmed so everyone in the world could see him picking up his shit on the White House lawn. What the hell's the matter with Mike Pompeo? He's a total religious fanatic. And I have nothing against religion. I come from a Christian family. I have nothing against religion. This guy is a total evangelist. Why am I saying this incorrectly? Evangelical fanatic who believes in nutty stuff. This guy has no business being in any type of position of power. And the fact that he came out and said that we're doing this to send a message to China and Russia, you do know that if there was ever a war to happen and assassinations became the norm of how that war was fought, like we just started assassinating each other's leaders and stuff like that, you would be on that list, right? Mike Pompeo? Like, you want to start a tick for tack on assassinations?
A quid pro quo, if you will.
Just assassinations back and forth. What the hell is the matter with this guy?
All right, but I think
he's going to get fired. I think he should get fired, and I think he is going to get fired.
I honestly think you're placing a lot of blame on Mike Pompeo on this one. I agree with you. He's fucking batshit crazy, and this was a stupid idea. But
I'm placing a lot of blame on Mike Pompeo's because Mike Pompeo is the snake in the ear. Like, Trump doesn't know what the hell's going on in the Middle East.
Trump was the one that hired him, and Trump was the one that pulled the trigger.
I agree. Trump deserves the fair share of the blame. I'm just saying the snake in the ear is Mike Pompeo. Like, he's either listening to Mike Pompeo, Rand Paul sometimes, or Tucker Carlson on the good side. But, like, what time is it?
It's almost time.
I think
let's call it quits.
Let's call it quits. All right, guys, thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to support the show, just rate and review the show. You could, if you're on Apple, of course, just rate and review the podcast. Send the musical ideas to info@brohistory.com. What historical topic or topic that we often speak about should we begin writing a Broadway musical for and start planning the pre-stage of production? We got to figure out a better idea than the Shaw and I. So anything you think of, we'll read them out loud in the show. If we get enough of them or if we get some. I think that'd be really fun. So send your historical topic Broadway musical idea, and we'll read them out on the next show to info@brohistory.com. info@brohistory.com, historical musical. And any last words?
Bonus points if you can write a couple of lines of the opening song.
Yeah. If you do that, then Danny will sing it.
I will sing it.
All right. Now you're now you're not incentivizing people anymore. You're deterring people from doing it. All right, peace.
See ya.